Hi, Mike.
Hey, Brent, how's it going?
Good, thanks. And you?
I'm glad to hear that.
I am so glad that we have time to chat because our chats are always fantastically insightful.
Have you
And
managed to master the art of figuring out which day of the week it is yet? I'm still trying to
oh,
figure that one
yes.
out.
Remember, I've been working remotely since 2011. So for me, this
All
is
right.
absolutely nothing new. My greatest
This is
challenge
old hat
is
for you, yeah.
old hat for me. It's more about controlling the light that spills in through the window, which I can't always do. Now it's nice and not too overexposed, but sometimes when the South African sun is really shining, it just goes whoosh, all white and pretty, like even a Snapchat filter can't do. So, Mike, you and I
Maybe you can
both,
explain to me, sorry,
yeah.
quickly, what happened yesterday. So I had another call yesterday, and I have no scientific or technical explanation for what I experienced, but I was sitting in this exact room, in this like exact frame like this with my fancy I'm a telesales consultant headset on, and in a Zoom call, and all of a sudden my image, not the other person's image, my video image just started to like strobe, like just like flash. And if I moved out of the frame, then it went normal. And then if I came back, it like strobed again. So I'm not sure if it's my bald forehead that caused like a reflection on the light. But anyways, thought I'd share
That's
that little
so weird.
anecdote
And you
with
weren't
you
using
about
a virtual background.
my have no idea. No, I don't even know what a virtual background is. Like, it's hard enough for me to get a normal background going, never mind a virtual background. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. We can move on from my strobing experience. And yeah,
Well, maybe we should start at the strobing experience because it's really good to hear that weird stuff happen even to people like you, who a bunch of us admire for starting so many businesses and running them successfully and selling them and then starting something new and running it successfully. It's really good to hear that you're human too and that weird stuff happened to you. But
very
take
much
me
so.
a little
Yeah.
bit through the process of what you've experienced. We both talk about business. We both see things very much the same thing. We know what goes into building a business, but we both come from very different backgrounds, and our
Mm.
focus might be a little bit different. You've had a couple of businesses which you've sold, and went on to build others. I'm still running mine, so my experience hasn't gone through selling process yet. So maybe just share with us what it takes and what your thought process is in your journey from start to finish and starting again.
Yeah, sure. Juanita, I mean, I'll try and take quite a personal view on that because I think that's more pertinent right now.
Yeah.
And so I sold a business called Cerebra in 2013 to a global ad conglomerate, which was a really incredible experience, and I learned an absolute fortune from that journey. But as is the case with most deals in the advertising world, there was quite an extended earnout, contractual
Mhm.
earnout process that happened after that. And so I spent another 4 years in the business, 4 and a bit years until the end of 2017. But having arrived at that point, still felt like there were things that I hadn't done that I really wanted to do in the business, like unfinished business that I wanted to that I guess I'd started or initiated that I wanted to wrap a bow around. And so I stayed in the business for another year, and there were quite substantial changes in the group of companies that we were a part of in that year. And towards the end of 2018, I realized that it was time for me to move on, partly because on a personal level, I think I needed a new challenge.
Mhm.
But I think also it was really good for the business. I think the business needed new thinking and different problem-solving techniques and different ways of approaching, sort of old problems. And the evidence has been that that was a really good decision on both counts. It was a really good journey for me. So I spent last year, the majority of 2019, doing a degree which focused on social business and social entrepreneurship. So building organizations that have some sort of social impact or social cause at the center of their focus.
Mhm.
And I traveled quite a lot back and forth from the UK for that program, and I loved that. And during the course of the year, also did a fair amount of speaking and facilitation work, which is obviously where we reconnected. And then sort of arrived at the beginning of this year, having done the degree, having left Cerebra, and thinking, well, like my options are endless, right? Like I have the
Yeah.
entire, the world is my oyster. And so a couple of things happen. I think the first thing I realized is that we grossly undervalue the thing that we have, so there's this narrative in the business world, and certainly in the world of entrepreneurship, that like you're only legitimized by whether or not you can sell your business, which is quite a ridiculous thought. I'm realizing more and more in retrospect is that how you run a business is so much more important than whether or not you've sold one. And I desperately miss having that business to be connected to and to help me find purpose and direction. And I think we often neglect, and there's that age-old adage that the grass is greener on the other side, and I think we often forget the value of the thing we've created and built. And so that was a big wake-up call for me. But on the other side, there was also like the realization that sometimes restrictions or parameters are really important to smart decision making. And when I suddenly had all the options in the world, I found it really difficult to figure out what I wanted to focus on.
Yeah.
And so I realized that the thing that I'm most passionate about, most sort of preoccupied with, is this idea of impactful leadership. And I didn't at the time realize how big a topic that would become in this year, and certainly now in this context. But I think one of the things that that the coronavirus pandemic and the COVID-19 infection and mortality rate, and the impact of that on economies and on national identities and on politics and on all of these things that are pillars of kind of the way we work as a society. What I'm realizing is what is absent from all of that is really compelling, really balanced, really thoughtful leadership, really intentional leadership. And there is a set of leaders who seem to be responding in a specific way. And I'm really grateful and really thankful that our own president is one of them, that seem to be embodying and exemplifying this idea of kind of what does it mean to be a considered and considerate leader, and others that I think are kind of deeply rooted in narcissism and that kind of age-old, what I say goes style of leadership, a bullying style of leadership that is not only ineffective right now, but like downright dangerous. It's like it has an immediate and significant threat to the well-being of millions of people. I mean, those are different stakes. It's not just whether or not I'm going to get votes. It's like how many people are going to die because I can't get over myself. So that was a very long intro, a very long answer to a very short question. But that's some of the stuff that I'm thinking about at the moment.
And it does happen when you make that change. It's you see the grass. You see the grass on the other side, and you're moving towards the grass, and you're wrapping up in the grass. And when you come to the grass, the field is so big that making decisions you get paralyzed by the options.
Yeah.
Because you think that when I have freedom, I'd be able to do more. And very, very often in life and in business, it's the opposite. It's easier when you give people options, or when you are given options, even if it's just a framework within which to make decisions. But when there's just an open field of possibility and it looks green, but you also see the thorns and the reality hits, that's really, really hard. And it's hard in the starting point. And, for the first 2 years, in my experience, it's that grapple with what is thorns, what is green, where do I go, what are the flowers, do I go to the mountains? If we take this picture, what do I do with this field? And then you become comfortable in the field. You start plowing it and sowing and reaping, etc. And it does make a big difference in how you run a business, whether you are running it to sell it because all of your decisions are completely different and focus on this one thing, and whether you're running it for sustainable profitability over a long period of time, and then all of your decisions there are completely different. And whether it may just rupture whether you are busy grooming your business for sale or grooming your business for long-term profitability, long-term sustainability. Decision making is one of the hardest parts, and that's where your impactful leadership comes in. It's how do you make those decisions, not just for the now, not just for the profits, but for that, the triple bottom line of the people and the planet and the profit. But it's easy to talk about being an impactful leader. With what you've studied so far and with what you've learned, what does being an impactful leader or leading for impact truly mean where the tacky hits the tar?
Yes, I think it's a really important question, and definitions in the space are so critical. Otherwise, we just land up with another buzzword that
Yeah.
Essentially means the same thing as a ton of, because we speak a lot about purpose and we speak a lot about mission-led business and whatever it might be. But so I think when I think about impactful leadership or impactful organizations, I think about two things, and they really are strategic frameworks or strategic variables that then lend themselves to a way of thinking about decision making or a way of thinking about how you build. And they're really simple. They're ultra simple, in fact. So to illustrate how simple they are, I'm going to use the counter example and go, if you said to me, Mike, figure out how to make Juanita's business as valuable as possible for her in the next month. That's your time frame. The next month is your time frame, and the measure for what you're trying to deliver in terms of a solution is the amount of money I can put in Juanita's pocket. Like that, those are the two things, right?
Okay.
So a month in terms of time frame and the amount of money I can get. Then the decisions about what we do are actually quite simple. They really are.
They really, really are.
You just fire everybody and you collect as much money as you possibly can from as many clients as you can. You put it and you go, well, if you've only got a month's time frame, that's an easy solution. And if the only person I have to worry about is you, then it's easy, right? So if I'm the only person I worry about and I'm thinking about the short term, decisions are easy. They're
Decisions are
really easy.
easy, but the conscience, it's hitting me in the face, the
Of
conscience.
course.
But I get
Now
what you're
that's
saying. We're not there
so
yet.
let me expand on the example. So if we go, okay, that we don't like the way that sounds. What if we looked at a value equation that took into account a year? So now we've got a much longer variable in terms of time. Like, what do I need to think about to ensure the sustainability or the resilience of your organization in a year's time? So it's 12 times more complex than what we were just thinking about. And also, there's a whole lot of unknowns, more so than ever before. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 12 months. But all of a sudden, the complexity increases exponentially. Okay. But what if I add another part of it? Because even if I said, let's just worry about your pocket for the next 12 months, still relatively simple. Because all you've got to do is figure out how to extract as much value out of your people and out of your clients and out of your suppliers as possible to get money into your pocket, right? But if I said to you, do the same exercise, but do it for your pocket, for the shareholders of your business, for your executive team and your employees, but forget about anyone else, right? That's really hard, but it's still not impossible because there are quantifiable variables that you can work with. And if I say to you, go through the same exercise, but now take into account the families of the people that you employ, the communities that they operate in, other externalities that might be in your supply chain or in the value creation chain, the people that the clients that you take money from, the people that they impact, and the communities that they have. Now, all of a sudden, your circle, I call it, and I stole this unapologetically from a comedian, actually, your circle of concern widens dramatically.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you've got an extremely wide circle of concern, the number of variables in that equation are almost infinite.
Yeah.
And if you've got a very wide circle of concern and a long period of time that you're working towards, the decisions that you make are going to be fundamentally, and in some cases, I would suggest diametrically different from what you would do if it was just about me in the short term. So now there's two things that come out of that illustration. All right. So the first thing is, most people say that they care about a lot of people and about the long term, but they behave in the opposite way. They behave in a,
Correct.
I'm actually only really interested in my own pocket and in the short term. So that's the first thing that we're seeing, is that sometimes what leaders say and what they do are very, very different. And that for me is an example of a very poor style of leadership and an ineffective style of leadership.
An old style of leadership. It used to work. It's not valid anymore. It hasn't been valid for quite a while, but especially now, that's over.
Yeah, well, I'd argue that that kind of inauthentic or dissonant style of communication has never really worked well, right? But the other thing I want to say, and this is really important to land, is that when I talk about an impactful leader or an impactful organization, I'm not necessarily intrinsically saying good. I'm not saying that to have impact, you have to be good. We talk a lot about purpose and impact in businesses, but if I use the example of, what is that movie, the Leonardo DiCaprio one, The Wolf of Wall Street, based on Jordan Belfort's story, right? So in that story, he starts a business, and that business's sole purpose is to make as much money as possible by selling penny stocks to gullible consumers, right? And the business is called Stratton Oakmont, and it is not necessarily completely legal. We would argue that it's got a very debatable moral compass. Their actions and their treatment of employees and customers is at best questionable. However, they're very clear about what they want to achieve. Okay, they're very clear about how they want to achieve it, and they communicate it perfectly, right? That is a high impact business with very clear purpose, very clear operations and systems that support that process, that definition of success, and then like radical execution. That is purpose. It's impact. It's just not. It's purpose and impact that somewhere in that equation, somewhere in that value creation story, somebody has to lose.
And that's where the unethical bit comes in. And in South Africa, we know a lot about the impact of unethical conduct, unethical decisions, where it's about the self and the other, but not about the greater good. And even, you know, if you go to those extremes, from a protecting certain societies or a certain demographic or a certain species of animals or certain parts of the environment, protecting that and your own viewpoint is not necessarily fair to the other. So it's in balancing the self and the good and the other, that fine balance line where the complexity comes in, where you're saying, well, what is the purpose and how does this purpose impact on those of others? It's about thinking in that circle of concern. And the first thing you have to do, in my experience, is you have to be really clear on what that circle of concern is, because it's very, it's actually easy. It's easy to say everything and everybody. The problem is when you say everything and everybody for everything I do, then you get to that analysis paralysis thing once again. So you have to be certain and build it out. And I'm sure you work on the same model, build it in, well, in my circle of influence, what are my tiers? How much of an effect do I have? How much of an impact do I have? And the mistake that I see many people make is they say, well, I'm aware of it, but you know, other people have an impact as well. Other businesses have a larger impact. It's not my responsibility. It's too far removed. And getting to the space of it's not my problem. It's not my job. And I'm assuming what you're saying, impactful leadership, is never getting to the point where you say, it's not my job, but also balancing it with these are my resources, this is my purpose, this is what the business is there for, this is what I can control, and this is what I can contribute.
So that I think is one part of it, and that's a really important point to make, because I mean there's plenty of evidence to support that you can be an entirely selfish, immoral and unethical leader and still do extremely well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge that there is an enormous amount of evidence to support that you don't really have to focus on being good. It's okay. You'll be fine.
Depending on what you measure.
However,
Depending on what you
yeah,
measure.
absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, I'm trying to own both sides of this argument. I'm trying to be both the advocate and the devil. The, the, the other side to the argument is that that model of creating value where someone loses is viable, but it would appear less so today than ever before. It would appear that there is a decreasing level of effectiveness or longevity, rather.
Longevity. So it's still effective.
Built
It's still
in.
effective,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
longevity is where it comes in.
And there's both practical and kind of quite ethereal reasons for that. There's topics around kind of brand reputation and how important it is for brands to be able to deliver on what they promise today, and kind of the ethical substance and DNA of a brand. It's not just you aren't who you say you are. You are who people tell their friends you are. You are the substance and collection of the thoughts and emotions and anecdotes and feelings that people have around your products and your services, right?
Reputation
So that's the
101.
first part.
Yeah.
The other part is just like, yeah, you can be the richest person in a state and have that be a failed state, and then your riches don't really matter, right? So that's the most extreme version of that. But the point there is that I think what we're realizing, what most of us, even the most hard-nosed, far-right capitalist, and I am a capitalist, by the way, I hope that's clear, but like, I think everybody's realizing we are part of a system. We are part of an organism that lives and breathes and changes and develops and evolves, and each one of us are contributing parts of that. And I'm not talking about fucking Ashton Kutcher butterfly effect random shit. I'm talking about the fact that, like, if you're the kind of person that can't see the connection between paying a Metro cop a bribe when you get pulled over the side of the road and the fact that you complain at the bar that same evening about corruption in the country, if you can't see the connection between those two things, you're the problem. You are the issue. You are the perfect example of why the system doesn't work, right? So I think what we're starting to acknowledge is that, without necessarily expressing it this clearly, is that there are in the world. There are people who believe that their opportunity to create value must come at the expense of others. And there are other people who believe that the only way for them to create real value is with others, right? Like, it is part of a system of acknowledging that I am because you are, that my experience of the world is meaningful because I've created me and yours, whatever it means. I'm very aware that a lot of this sounds like a motivational poster, but I think there is a lot of substance behind this, and a lot of meaning behind this idea that the best way to create a business that has longevity and resilience built into it, if you really sincerely want your business to last in the next 15, 20 years, you can't not think about this. It can't be missing from your planning. It can't be outside the realm of your consideration. You have to sit with this. You have to wrestle with complexity.
You have to make time for it. But so I've got two questions. The one is the interplay between the ethereal and the practical, because it's really easy and it's really fun to philosophize about this and build a world where it's all, butterflies and moonshine and roses and no thorns and so on, and to do the theory around it. That's really, really easy. And as speakers, sometimes that's what we get paid for. But on the practical side, and that's always where I feel this daunting responsibility. When you go back to the boardroom, when you go back to the office, that's where it gets really practical, and you don't deal in la-di-da anymore. You deal in real hard facts, where at the end of the day, if you don't have money in your pocket, you can't do any of these big social impact things. So that's the one thing, the balance, and maybe we need to discuss the balance between the philosophy and the ethereal and the practical in business. And then also I want to ask you a hard question. Were you always this enlightened, or did you create Cerebra initially to, because you wanted to make an impact in the world? Or was it a little bit more, as most entrepreneurs do, if they don't create social businesses, for the money?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to answer by answering the second one first, and then I'm going to go back to the first one.
Yeah.
I created Cerebra because I couldn't get a job at a real company. There was no thinking about purpose or no, not at all. I was desperate. I was desperate. That's why I started Cerebra. I started Cerebra because I had this um, overwhelming sense that I just didn't fit in anywhere else, and so I wanted to create something where I did fit in. And so let me tell you how I led Cerebra.
Yeah.
Often really badly. I made
We
some
learn as
really
we
bad
go,
choices that
we learn as
sure.
we go. There's no other way. I wish there was, and I wish, no one had to get hurt. But in the beginning, you do what you can with what you have.
Yeah, and I think there would be a lot of people who left Cerebra that will tell you that I did a poor job, or that there were elements of my leadership style that were toxic or hurtful, or and I mean I've had to wrestle with that a lot, and I think the key part there is my response to that wasn't doubling down on my assumptions about what made leadership work and not work. So I'm going to say something that's going to sound extremely naff, but it really, really is the truth. This absolutely is the truth. I got to the point where I realized that these are the things that were important to me. Number one, that I made money while I ran Cerebra, so that it enabled other things in my life. It was a vehicle for value creation. That was the first thing. Number two, that it was a business that had a positive reputation, a strong reputation in the minds of suppliers, customers, stakeholders, that it conjured up positive thoughts and positives, so that the brand was strong and that the brand was connected in some way to that value creation piece. But the third part was probably the most important part, is I realized the only way for me to do those two things was to design a business that people left better or more. They left more than when they arrived. They were more fulfilled, more informed, more educated, more capable. I mean, one of the things that genuinely made me very happy was seeing people leave Cerebra and go on to be the brand manager of a big company, or to start their own agencies, or to. And I genuinely loved seeing that happen. And I could be accused of many things, but never ever of stopping people from doing that. And so that was a really important measure for me. And so when I talk about the circle of concern, my employees' net well-being, the net positive social impact we had on their lives, and by extension, the people who relied on them, that was a very big part of our decision-making framework, sometimes to our own detriment, right? And let me be clear, a lot of this is not purely altruistic. A lot of this was about my ego and needing to be a messiah complex and being seen as the person that so a lot of that is dysfunctional as well. But I realized that even though some of it was dysfunctional at its core, it was very effective in its execution. And I think any success that Cerebra had can be attributed to those three things. Number one, it was designed to be a value creating vehicle. Number two, it was designed to have a very effective and very potent brand. And then three, those things were only enabled through a focus on employees' net social well-being. And despite the many mistakes and errors and pitfalls, that was the recipe that I think worked well. So to answer your first question, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that you have like the brand stuff and then the business. They're not like, you don't.
It's not either or. So many, it's both. And
but that's what we see so many businesses doing, right? Like we've got a bad reputation, so let's get a new logo. Like that's not the problem. The logo is not the issue. we used to have people saying to us, people complain about us because of Twitter and Facebook. And I go, people complain about you because you were really shit to them.
Yeah,
It
Twitter
wasn't
and
Twitter or
Facebook, now
Facebook.
you just know about it. People have been complaining about you all this time. You just know about it. Now, what are you going to do? And the fix is not in spin. The fix is in
Yeah.
fixing the hard stuff in your business.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the realizations was that what we did for our clients, what we hoped to do for our clients, was to, in some way, shape, or form, narrow this like void between what they said they were or who they promised to be, and then what they really were in practice. And I figured I couldn't do that with a clear conscience. I couldn't do that effectively if we weren't doing that for Cerebra. And so that was a very big focus. Now, where that then became a kind of preoccupation from an impactful business perspective is that not because I think I'm an example of that, is because I was like if I can figure out how to quantify that and teach people to do that, that's got to be valuable. That's got to be
Yeah.
really interesting from a business perspective. If I ask you the question, do you want your business to be around longer than the next? And I say, do you care about people? And you go, yeah. Okay, cool. Show me how you're doing both of those things. Show me how you're demonstrating
Yeah.
a, number one, an intention, and number two, a capability to actually do both of those things, exist beyond the next 5 years, and deliver really positive value to all of your stakeholders. And if we can, I think, help people to do that in a very practical and very accessible way, I don't just think we will have a positive impact on the world. I think we'll build much better businesses and much more resilient, much more,
Yeah.
your word, sustainable, much more adaptable businesses. And I mean, we're realizing now at this time that adaptability and resilience are far more important measures for an organization than growth and profitability exclusively, right? Because I would rather have a business that is adaptable over the next 10 years, that grows at 10% with a 10% margin, than have a business that grows at 50% with a 30% margin that can only last over the next year because we've extracted all of the value out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about those dynamics.
I very simply call it doing better business better. There's lots
Yeah.
written and there's lots you can study, and many people are experts on doing better business. But the second better bit for me is and how do we reduce the collateral damage? How do you reduce the at the expense of bit? And then you get into topics like communication and ethics and governance and all of these other things that were traditionally add-ons but have now moved into the core of the business when you do make all of these decisions. And especially as it gets more complex, whether you sell it or whether you run it, whether you've inherited it from a generational point of view, or whether you've started it, or whether you're an appointed CEO, you've got to make the decisions for both betters, doing financially better in a way that creates value. And I like, it's interesting for me that you keep on saying creates value, creates value, creates value. Is that value purely financial? Should that value be different? Just to give it some context, when I do facilitation sessions and we get into the stakeholder bit and the repurposing bit and the innovation bit and aspirational bit, I often don't ask, well, what type of products could you make, or what are your stakeholders groups? I ask it very, very pure and simple, and the response to this is amazing. Who's got your money? And it's a way people don't think about it. You shouldn't talk about money that way. You shouldn't be that direct. But who's got your money? If we flip that around and say, who's got your value? Can we say that can we quantify that value in different terms other than just financial?
Yes, I think the question, what is valuable to you, is an interesting question. And it sounds very simple, but I think if we sit and dig deep into the automatic responses we have to that question, and then the other, so for me, like when I talk to leaders and when I work with entrepreneurs around defining value, absolutely money is like a predominant and overwhelming part of that, because it is a very powerful metric for
Mm-hmm.
success, of course. And again, as you rightly said earlier on, without that money, without that fuel, even our most ambitious ideas fall flat. That
Yeah,
is
it's
just
the
the way of the world.
enabler.
That is
it,
the
it it shouldn't be the end
what.
point, but it's
And
definitely
also,
the
sometimes
enabler.
it's really nice just to have a lot of money. And again, that's okay. Just be honest about that. Just be clear that that's the objective. Like that's so. Again, nothing. Love money. Money's great. They're all good. But again, you know, you can work your ass off for 48 years, make an absolute ton of money, and then have a coronary, and all of a sudden you don't get to. So there's other things that start to come into the equation, other things that sort of balance out my bank balance, and that's like
Mm-hmm.
my own personal health, right? So I great to be wealthy, but like I also want to be able to enjoy that wealth. So for me, the freedom to be able to go on trips with my kids or to spend time guilt free with my mates, to explore hobbies and interests that are completely unrelated to my work, those are things that increase my experience of life and help me sleep better at night. And so I'm not the busiest guy on the planet. I'm pretty sure I could make more money, but I'm one of the happiest and I sleep very well. And those are important measures for me, right? So
Yeah.
that's one. One is around kind of personal health and well-being.
And shifting that
And
measurement so that it becomes personal for you, not chasing a measurement that others have created. Obviously, you know, you are your own boss, so you create that measurement. If the measurement is created for you, then you have a little less of a choice, but still, even in that bit where you don't work, you have to know what is valuable to you.
yeah, so I mean, that is why I use the term value creation, because I think it allows for more variables than just
Mm-hmm.
pure profit,
Mm-hmm.
or the size of your business. It's one of the dumbest metrics I've ever heard in my life. Is like we employ 90 people. I'm like, okay, that's great.
How
I
happy
mean,
are
from a
they?
job
Are they a good suit? Are they
well, from a
are they easy to
job
manage?
creation perspective, it's great,
Yeah.
right? Like we are in a country that needs a lot of jobs to be created, and small business is a wonderful platform for that,
Mm-hmm.
and I completely advocate for that. But using the number of people in your company as its measure for effectiveness is a completely useless metric. Things are really interesting for us, and a lot of these answers we don't quite have yet because we're still learning and still unpacking
Yeah.
what this level of complexity means for leaders and for leadership. But I think this is an exciting opportunity for us to evaluate what techniques and what types of businesses not only survive in what is arguably the biggest thing to happen to the world in the last 80 years,
Mm-hmm.
but thrive in it, because there are some organizations that are thriving, and it's got very little to do with what they sell or what they do. It's got a lot to do with how they think and how they're positioned and how they are led. And I think we're going to come out of this experience with some phenomenal case studies for what it means to create organizations that are truly resilient and truly adaptable.
As a last comment, this might be the hardest question and it might be impossible to answer, but what advice do you have for leaders who are in complete crisis mode, who do not have the luxury of cash flow, who's at the last of everything, who's sitting with a shell of everything they've ever worked for, and they're listening to this and they're saying, well, how can I be impactful if I have to only look at the money in my pocket at this stage? Any last bits of advice?
So I think the one thing that I'd want to say to people, and I'm aware that there are a lot of business owners that are in nothing short of like an all-out strife situation, and I'm actually like speaking about it, I'm emotional because I know what that feels like, and I know how hard and how dark and how lonely that space is. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the first thing I'd want to say to them is that this is not a failure. Nobody, barring saw this coming, predicted this. had any idea we were going to be where we were. Literally 3 months ago, nobody knew we were going to be where we are. This is not your fault. And it is okay to be in the place that you're in, and it is okay to feel the way that you're feeling, and it's not a failure. But you will need to make some hard decisions to protect yourself and your family and the people that rely on you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't do it alone. One of the really dangerous byproducts of this absolutely necessary time of self-isolation is that we kind of mentally and emotionally isolate as one. I think these moments, connecting with people like you, the odd phone call. I actually just been thinking about this a lot over the last while, but looking after one's own mental health and that one's own connectedness and one's own perspective is just so critical in a time like this. So if you're feeling down, you're feeling alone, and you're feeling depressed, that's really normal. I think that's standard right now. Welcome to the club, right? Membership 7 billion people. Please connect, reach out, have a chat, write a letter, pick up the phone people you care about. Everybody's got somebody who can support them. Don't miss out on the opportunity to get some of that support. So I know I've had people in my life that have been extraordinarily helpful in this time, and I continue to rely on them, and I hope that I can be that person for some other people. But yeah, just make sure you don't isolate emotionally.
Yeah. And for me, it's whenever I've been at such a beginning phase, whether it's been by choice or by absolute choice of others, it's that make it as small as possible. Keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of decisions to make. Yes, there's a lot of hard decisions to make, but make them one at a time. The moment you allow your mind to become overwhelmed by the enormity of this, you disable yourself to actually move one tiny micro step at a time. It's literally decision per decision, email per email, message per message, second by second, until you get into a space where you've got one finger under yourself. The getting up process is not easy, but it will take time, and we've got to be honest about this. It will take time, and it will take enormous courage, and it will take enormous strength, which is why you shouldn't be doing it alone. But restarting is always possible. Growing it again, even after you've lost everything, or after everything has been taken away from you, it is possible. But it's a long journey. It's about consistency, and it's definitely not about keeping up this public persona of everything is fine, but being honest and just keep on going. Before the crash, you were where you were because you started in a hard time, most probably way back when. It sucks that we've got to restart, that many businesses have to restart, but you did it once. Chances are you'll most probably be able to do it again. Mike, thank you so very much. I'm inspired to go make an impact, to go and decide what creates value for me and for those that I take care of, for those I've made a salary promise to, for my family, and the supply chain as far as I can figure it out. Thank you for being that beacon, and I wish you all the best in inspiring others to be impactful as well.
Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for inviting me.
Chat again soon. Bye, Mike.
Bye.